Welcome. Today, we're diving into the topic of rent control, a term you may have heard in discussions about housing or city living. Rent control refers to government policies that limit how much landlords can charge tenants for renting a home or apartment. These regulations are designed to keep housing affordable, especially in cities where demand is high and prices can skyrocket. But what exactly does rent control mean, and how does it work? In this video, we'll break down the basics, explore its history, and discuss its impact on both tenants and landlords. Let's start by understanding what rent control is and why it exists. Rent control is a set of laws or ordinances that restrict how much landlords can increase rent for existing tenants. The main goal is to protect renters from sudden and unaffordable rent hikes, ensuring that people can stay in their homes even as the market changes. These laws often set a maximum percentage by which rent can be raised each year, and sometimes they also regulate how often increases can occur. Rent control policies vary widely from city to city and country to country, but the core idea remains the same: to provide stability and predictability for renters. The primary reason for implementing rent control is to address the issue of housing affordability. In many urban areas, the demand for rental housing far exceeds the supply, leading to rapidly rising rents. Without some form of regulation, many residents, especially those with lower incomes, could be priced out of their neighborhoods. Rent control aims to prevent displacement, promote social stability, and ensure that cities remain accessible to people from all walks of life. It's a tool that governments use to balance the interests of tenants and landlords while maintaining a diverse community. Rent control typically works by setting legal limits on how much rent can be increased for existing tenants. For example, a city might allow landlords to raise rent by only 2% or 3% per year, regardless of changes in the market. These rules often apply only to certain types of housing, such as older apartment buildings or units built before a specific date. Newer constructions might be exempt. The details depend on local laws, but the overall goal is to keep rent increases predictable and manageable for tenants. There are two main types of rent control: strict and moderate. Strict rent control, sometimes called first-generation rent control, freezes rents at a certain level and allows only minimal increases. Moderate or second-generation rent control allows for regular but limited rent increases, often tied to inflation or a set percentage. Some cities also have rent stabilization, which is similar but may include additional rules about tenant protections and eviction. Understanding the type of rent control in place is key to knowing your rights and responsibilities as a tenant or landlord. Rent control isn't a new idea. It first appeared during World War I and became more widespread during World War II as governments tried to prevent housing shortages and price gouging. Over the decades, different cities and countries have adopted, modified, or repealed rent control laws based on changing economic conditions and political climates. Today, rent control remains a hotly debated topic, with supporters arguing it's essential for affordability and critics claiming it can discourage investment in housing. Rent control policies are most common in large, expensive cities where housing demand is high. In the United States, cities like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles have some form of rent control or rent stabilization. Other countries, such as Germany and Sweden, also have their own versions of rent regulation. The specifics vary, but the underlying goal is the same: to make sure that people can afford to live in urban centers without being pushed out by rising rents. Rent control is designed to benefit tenants, especially those with lower or fixed incomes. By limiting rent increases, these policies help people stay in their homes and avoid being priced out of their neighborhoods. Long-term tenants often see the most benefit, as their rent remains stable over time. However, new renters may find it harder to find available units, since existing tenants are less likely to move out. Landlords may also face challenges, which we'll discuss in upcoming scenes. From a landlord's point of view, rent control can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provides stability and reduces tenant turnover, which can save money on advertising and repairs. On the other hand, it limits the income landlords can earn from their properties, which may make it harder to cover maintenance costs or invest in improvements. Some landlords argue that strict rent control discourages them from renting out units or maintaining their properties, which can affect the overall quality of housing. While the terms rent control and rent stabilization are often used interchangeably, they can mean different things. Rent control usually refers to older, stricter laws that freeze or cap rents at low levels. Rent stabilization, on the other hand, allows for regular, limited increases and often includes additional tenant protections. Both aim to keep housing affordable, but the details and rules can vary widely depending on the city or region. Under rent control or stabilization, rent increases are typically tied to a formula set by local law. This might be a fixed percentage, such as 2% per year, or linked to inflation or the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The goal is to ensure that rent rises are predictable and fair rather than subject to sudden spikes. Landlords must follow these rules closely, and tenants are usually notified in advance of any approved increase. Not all rental properties are subject to rent control. Typically, only older buildings or units built before a certain date are covered. Newer constructions, single-family homes, and luxury apartments are often exempt. The exact rules depend on local laws, so it's important for both tenants and landlords to check which properties are included. This selective coverage is meant to balance the need for affordable housing with incentives for new development. Rent control laws often come with additional protections for tenants. These might include rules about eviction, requirements for lease renewals, and limits on security deposits. The aim is to give renters more security and prevent landlords from using loopholes to force tenants out. These protections help create stable communities and reduce the risk of sudden displacement. Under rent control, landlords can't evict tenants without a valid reason, such as non-payment of rent or violating the lease. In many cities, landlords must provide written notice and sometimes even compensation if they want to remove a tenant for reasons like major renovations or converting the unit to another use. These rules are designed to prevent unfair evictions and keep tenants from losing their homes unexpectedly. One of the main criticisms of rent control is that it can reduce the supply of available rental housing. Some argue that strict rent limits discourage landlords from investing in new properties or maintaining existing ones, leading to fewer and lower quality rental units. Others believe that with the right balance, rent control can protect tenants without harming the housing market. The impact on supply depends on how the laws are written and enforced. To encourage new housing development, many cities exempt newly built properties from rent control for a certain number of years. This is meant to attract investment and increase the supply of rental units. Developers are more likely to build if they know they can charge market rates for a period of time. After the exemption period, some units may become subject to rent control, depending on local laws. Another concern is that rent control may lead landlords to cut back on maintenance or repairs since their rental income is limited. This can result in older buildings falling into disrepair, which isn't good for tenants or neighborhoods. Some cities address this by requiring landlords to meet minimum standards for upkeep, regardless of rent control. These rules help ensure that affordable housing remains safe and livable. Supporters of rent control argue that it helps keep neighborhoods stable by allowing long-term residents to stay in their homes. When people aren't forced to move due to rising rents, communities can maintain their character and social ties. This stability is especially important for families, seniors, and others who rely on local networks for support. Gentrification is a process where rising property values and rents push out longtime residents in favor of wealthier newcomers. Rent control can help slow this process by keeping housing affordable for existing tenants. However, it's not a complete solution. Other policies, like affordable housing development and tenant protections, are also needed to address gentrification fully. At its core, rent control is about making housing affordable for more people. By limiting rent increases, these policies help ensure that working families, seniors, and others on fixed incomes aren't priced out of their homes. Affordability is a key goal for many cities, and rent control is one tool among many used to achieve it. Rent control is often seen as a way to promote social equity. By protecting low and middle-income tenants from steep rent hikes, these policies help reduce economic inequality and prevent displacement. This can lead to more diverse, inclusive communities where people of different backgrounds can live and thrive together. By keeping rents stable, rent control can give families more financial security and flexibility. When people aren't spending most of their income on housing, they have more resources for education, healthcare, and other opportunities. This can improve economic mobility and help break the cycle of poverty for some households. Rent control can have complex effects on the housing market. While it helps existing tenants, it may also reduce the number of available rental units if landlords choose to convert properties to other uses. Some studies suggest that rent control can lead to a shortage of rental housing, while others argue that with the right balance, it can protect tenants without harming supply. The impact depends on how the laws are designed and enforced. Some critics argue that rent control discourages investment in rental housing. If landlords can't raise rents to cover costs or make a profit, they may be less likely to build new units or maintain existing ones. Supporters counter that with proper incentives and regulations. It's possible to balance affordability with investment. The debate continues in cities around the world. Rent control can also affect property values. In some cases, properties covered by rent control may sell for less than similar, non-regulated units because of the limits on rental income. However, in high-demand areas, even rent-controlled properties can remain valuable. The effect on property values depends on local market conditions and the specifics of the rent control laws. In some cities, strict rent control has led to the rise of black market rentals. When legal rents are much lower than market rates, Some landlords may try to get around the rules by charging illegal fees or under-the-table payments. This can create problems for both tenants and authorities, and is one reason why some experts advocate for moderate rather than strict rent control. One unintended effect of rent control is that it can reduce tenant mobility. When rents are much lower than the market rate, tenants may be reluctant to move, even if their housing needs change. This can make it harder for new renters to find available units and may lead to a mismatch between housing supply and demand. Rent control can shape the demographics of a city. By making it possible for long-term residents to stay, it can help preserve the age, income, and cultural diversity of neighborhoods. However, if new renters can't find affordable units, it may also limit the influx of younger or lower-income residents. The demographic impact depends on how rent control is implemented and enforced. Rent control laws are sometimes challenged in court by landlords or property owners who argue that the regulations violate their property rights. Courts have generally upheld the right of governments to regulate rents as long as the laws are reasonable and serve a public purpose. Legal battles continue in many places, shaping the future of rent control policies. Rent control is just one tool for addressing housing affordability. Other policies include building more affordable housing, offering rental assistance, and providing tax incentives for landlords. Many experts argue that a combination of approaches is needed to create a healthy, affordable housing market. The best solution depends on local needs and conditions. Public opinion on rent control is often divided. Tenants and housing advocates tend to support it as a way to keep housing affordable and prevent displacement. Landlords and some economists, however, worry about its impact on investment in housing supply. The debate is ongoing, and opinions can shift as housing markets change. New York City is one of the most famous examples of rent control and rent stabilization in action. The city has a complex system with different rules for buildings constructed before and after certain dates. Some apartments are subject to strict rent control, while others fall under rent stabilization, which allows for limited annual increases. The system is designed to protect tenants while balancing the needs of landlords. San Francisco also has a well-known rent control system. Most apartments built before 1979 are covered with limits on annual rent increases and strong tenant protections. The city's high housing costs make rent control a critical issue for many residents. However, the rules do not apply to newer buildings, single-family homes, or condos, which can lead to disparities in rent prices across the city. Los Angeles has its own version of rent control, known as the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. This law covers most rental units built before 1978 and limits annual rent increases to a set percentage. The ordinance also includes eviction protections and rules about security deposits. Like other cities, LA's rent control laws are designed to keep housing affordable while encouraging investment in new construction. Rent control isn't just an American phenomenon. Many countries around the world have their own versions of rent regulation. For example, Germany has strict rules about rent increases and tenant protections, while Sweden uses a system of negotiated rents between landlords and tenant associations. Each country adapts rent control to fit its own housing market and social needs. The COVID-19 pandemic brought renewed attention to rent control and tenant protections. Many cities enacted temporary bans on evictions and froze rent increases to help people stay in their homes during the crisis. These emergency measures highlighted the importance of stable, affordable housing in times of uncertainty. Inflation can affect the effectiveness of rent control. If rent increases are capped below the rate of inflation, landlords may struggle to cover rising costs for maintenance, taxes, and utilities. Some rent control systems tie allowable increases to inflation indexes to balance tenant protection with landlord needs. Urban planners consider rent control as part of a broader strategy to manage city growth and housing needs. By keeping rents affordable, cities can retain essential workers, families, and seniors. However, planners must also ensure that rent control doesn't discourage new construction or lead to housing shortages. Balancing these goals is a key challenge for city governments. Some advocates argue that rent control can help prevent homelessness by keeping housing affordable for vulnerable groups. While it's not a complete solution, stable rents can reduce the risk of eviction and displacement. Combined with other policies, rent control can be part of a broader effort to address homelessness in cities. Ensuring that rent-controlled housing remains safe and well-maintained is a challenge. Some cities require regular inspections and set minimum standards for rental units. These measures help protect tenants and ensure that affordable housing doesn't come at the expense of quality. Fairness is a key issue in the rent control debate. Some argue that it's unfair for long-term tenants to pay much less than new renters in the same building. Others believe that protecting vulnerable tenants is more important than market equality. Striking the right balance between fairness and affordability is an ongoing challenge for policymakers. As housing markets evolve, so do rent control policies. Some cities are experimenting with new models, such as tying rent increases to local wage growth or offering incentives for landlords to maintain affordable units. Technology, data analysis, and community input are also shaping the future of rent regulation. Technology is playing a growing role in rent control enforcement and policy design. Online databases, digital lease agreements, and data analytics help cities track compliance and identify trends. These tools make it easier for tenants to know their rights and for governments to enforce the rules. Rent control can have a profound impact on communities. By helping people stay in their homes, it supports neighborhood stability, local businesses, and social networks. However, the effects can vary depending on how the laws are written and enforced. Community input is essential for creating policies that work for everyone. Rent control remains a complex and evolving issue. While it offers important protections for tenants, it also raises questions about investment, housing supply, and fairness. The best approach depends on local conditions and the needs of the community. As cities continue to grow and change, rent control will likely remain a key part of the conversation about affordable housing. Thanks for joining us as we explored what rent control is and why it matters.